Hello and welcome again. So today, yesterday we did look at how we can extract data using various ways to extract rows and columns from that data, as well as maybe doing some filtering. We saw all of this yesterday. So today we'll be looking at what we call group summaries. Group summaries are used a lot if maybe for the air quality data we're trying to calculate the mean for temperature for various months. Is very important because that kind of um, analysis, you see it a lot if you're going to work like a statistician, like a data analyst, and so on. Let's just see a recap of this. That if I was to calculate like the mean of temperature using the vector format where we can extract the vector and run it here. But this is like giving me the mean for that temperature from that entire data set for the various months. If I do view here, let's look at how that data looks like again. So we see here it is giving me this like the average temperature for all these months. But what if I wanted to calculate the temperature for each of these months? Remember, this data set is running from what, May to September. You need to do that kind of analysis because if questions might come up like, what did you think was the average temperature per month for in New York? So you need to know that kind of analysis based on this data. So the first thing we are going to be using is what we call the aggregate function in R. So for aggregate, I'm going to pass that variable, which is a numeric variable. I do a tilde, which will be for the month. And then now with this, you're going to pass in data, the data you are using, which is the air quality data. And then you pass in what we call what? Function. A function what we're going to be using here is what? Mean. So we run this, we see that we are having a nicely formatted table here, which is giving us the various average temperature for each of these months from May to September, which makes a lot of sense rather than just talking about the entire average temperature in New York. That analysis might be good, but questions might come up. Okay, what do you think was the average temperature for each of these months? Not looking at the entire average temperature for from May to September. So it's very important. Another thing you can do is you can look at this data. Maybe you want to look at the zone, based on that for the various months. Another thing we are going to be looking at is, for the by default, the aggregate function is going to remove any missing values for that column. That's one thing you should know, that the aggregate function takes care of what all these missing values. So let's say if I wanted to do, that mean for more than two numeric columns. Let's say I wanted to look at that for wind speed and temperature for those various months. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use what we call in RC bind, which you can take in those two columns. Those two columns will be temperature and what? Temperature, comma, wind. And then I'm going to do the tilde here, which the categorical variable there is the month. I will still do my data is equals to what? The air quality data. And then I will do my function there is equals to what? The mean. So you see how nicely formatted this is. It's going to give you, these are things you can interpret very easily. In this case, you are looking at the group mean for what? For temperature and wind, based on group by what? Group by the various months, which makes a lot of good way you can analyze this data. Instead, you can still do that if you want to look at the spread, how spread they are, which is like looking at the standard deviation. I will just come in this function here. I'll pass in what? Move the mean and pass in SD, and then we can see the spread of these two variables for the various months. Another thing you can do, we have different ways. Maybe you want to look at the count for the number of observations in each of these groups. You can still do count. There will be what will be learned. So you can do the count. I want to do that for temperature for the various months. My data is equals to air quality. And then the function now will be equals to what? learned. Learned function is learned. Careful. Then we run this. We're gonna see that, you know, for which makes a lot of sense, right? Because if we count month of like the number of days in May, they are 31. We know June is what is 30, July is 31, August is 31, and September is what, 30. That is the way we can, you know, look at the count, which is based. Another common way of doing group summaries is what we use. We use the by function. The by function, it's a little bit good, but you won't have like good quality as we have, and then you have to be passing in vectors instead. Like if you're looking at temperature, and then we're gonna pass in temperature, and then we do the month. We pass in that month again like a vector, and then we're gonna do mean. You see at the end, it gives you something which is similar, but you see it is not nicely formatted. Look at this format here that we have here is not the best compared to what we had up here. So you can choose to use what you want, but I still think the aggregate function, you know, is really nice. And but what makes the by function useful is that unlike the aggregate function, it is easy to use with functions that take more than one variable as input. That is one thing about the by function. If you know, it can take more variables. So if we want to compute something like the correlation between wind and temperature group by month, then the best way to use is what is that by function. So meaning if I want to do the correlation for 2 columns, I can do air quality. We saw how we filter those columns. I want to do that for column 3 to 4, and column 3 and 4 here will simply be what wind and temperature. I want to do it comma by what air quality for the various months, and then I pass in that function which is the correlation, and then I run it. We're gonna see, so the correlation between wind and temperature from the month of September is like minus that's like 57%. This minus here doesn't, you know, that's not the way you interpret it. It simply means that the wind will decrease as the temperature is increasing. That's the way to interpret this. And then we can see that for temperature and temperature itself, we will see what we call the correlation matrix as we go on. This is like what we call like a correlation matrix, where, you know, temperature and itself, the correlation will always be 1, as well as wind to itself, it will be 1. But if we are looking at the correlation between wind and temperature, it will be minus like 31%. If we are looking at wind and temperature here, so it's a little bit different, and so on. So guys, that's what we have for today. For the next video, we are going to be using what we call pipes in R, and then we'll keep going that way. And as I did mention, you're going to learn a lot from this base knowledge in R. Thank you so much, and bye for now.